Good morning. Good morning. That was enthusiastic. It is so nice to be back here and to see you all here. And, I want you to know that you have been prayed for and looked after and loved by our Unity family. Unity Village and one of our Unity centers in Alabama have both called and offered to help us in any way that they could. And fortunately, we didn't need that help. We are very, very grateful that we were able to get everything taken care of and cleaned up. May we have a moment of silence to give thanks for our good fortune at Unity here in New Orleans and to pray for all those who are still struggling with the effects of Hurricane Ida. A moment of silence. Amen. I'd like to start today's third and final talk about Unity great Reverend Robert Brummett's book, Finding Yourself in Transition, with a story about two furry little caterpillars. They had made their way into a New Orleans home and had spent time crawling around on a beautiful Oriental rug. Just imagine these two caterpillars are crawling around on their little two-dimensional world. The earthbound duo had made their way over each of these designs as they inched along the exquisitely woven patterns and colors. Now, Caterpillar 1, Wanda was her name. She was pretty confused as she was crawling over all this. The colored threads and all those designs were changing colors constantly as she inched along, and there seemed to be an interminable chaos going on down there for poor little Wanda. The lovely patterns weren't at all apparent to Wanda as she made her way through each one of these little patterns. She didn't know which way she was going from moment to moment. It all seemed kind of meaningless to her because from her unenlightened vantage point down there, those constantly changing carpet colors and threads and hues made absolutely no sense. Just imagine you're down there in this two-dimensional reality and everything's just constantly changing and you don't understand it. But then Caterpillar 2, Faith is her name, had the same situation as Wanda, but Faith didn't have the same experience. Something just in Faith's heart just knew that everything was in divine order. And when the time came, Faith embraced the natural process of shedding her caterpillar self and accepting her larva state, and then eventually she left the security of all that she had ever known being a caterpillar and flew away in the unknown as a soaring butterfly, as you see here, my very favorite picture around here. You see, Faith understood the meaning of Galatians 5:1, for freedom, Christ has set us free. As Faith flew away as a beautiful butterfly, she looked down at this priceless Oriental rug that she had been crawling over, and from up here, she saw all of the perfectly woven patterns and designs and colors, so magnificently obvious from her vantage point up there. She now understood up here the divine order of it all. But as Faith flew away, she saw poor Wanda down there, and she felt great compassion because poor little Wanda was still floundering around, hopelessly suffering and confused on that carpet. She looked so weak and so miserable because she had relentlessly hung on to her caterpillarness, which was now wasting away. Wanda refused to let go of her caterpillar being and go into that larva state, which would lead to her transformation and freedom into the three-dimensional world. Wanda had lived her whole life not daring to question her caterpillar self. And as a caterpillar, Wanda would die. Now, last month, I shared with you the same ideas as those in this butterfly story, but as they are seen in our human condition. In our present state of consciousness, we can't always see the patterns in the tapestry of life. But if we let go of our old selves and our old conditioning and consciousness, we too can soar above our mechanical selves and access higher states of consciousness, which is that freedom talked about in Galatians 5:1. For freedom, Christ has set us free. This freedom is our freedom from lower states of consciousness, which removes then the block to accessing joy, abundance, and peace, the kingdom of heaven on earth for us. The Buddhists say in the Four Noble Truths, the first Noble Truth says that life is suffering, which means that in our present state, we suffer. The second Noble Truth says there's a cause of suffering, which is us, our thinking. The third Noble Truth is that there's an end of suffering, which is to change our thinking. This idea is also one of the main principles of unity, that our consciousness creates our world. In the Old Testament, this end of suffering and complete happiness is called the Promised Land. And in the Moses allegory, the chosen ones whom Moses led out of Egypt couldn't access, remember, the Promised Land for 40 years after they had been led out of slavery. They wandered around the desert, and all of the original chosen ones who had left Pharaoh's slavery had to die. It was the next generation that actually entered the Promised Land. Not one of those who originally left Egypt entered the Promised Land. Metaphysically, that means that there had to be a death of the former state of consciousness before they could attain the Promised Land or heaven on earth. In terms of us, since every place and person in the Bible represents a part of us, our psyche, we have to die to our old selves in order to attain the level of consciousness necessary to attain heaven on earth, our Promised Land. Just like Faith the caterpillar had to die to her caterpillar state in order to become free and to soar away as a butterfly. The Bible, which is the best psychology book I have ever read, says that we must undergo a metanoia, which means a complete change in our thinking and living. This is equivalent to our 40 years of wandering in the desert of life. Life can be a desert when we're not working with it. The chosen ones in the Moses story had to let go of their former selves that worshiped, you remember, foreign gods like Baal. They needed to recommit to their covenant with God. Now, in our case, those other gods may be worship of materialism or power or ego. And we too must recommit to our covenant to live by the eternal laws and the eternal wisdom, like forgiveness, compassion, unity with all life. When we recommit to our covenant with the higher laws and wisdom, we too can enter that state of peace, love, abundance, and joy. It's our inheritance, and it's our choice. For those of you who weren't here in August, Reverend Brummett book is a mixture of Eastern and Western mysticism, psychology, Bible interpretation, and personal history. He presents us with a roadmap to this higher state that allows us to quit suffering, the suffering that the Buddhist Four Noble Truths talk about. The roadmap that Reverend Brummett presents leads us to our state of heaven on earth. Some of you may remember that this roadmap has 3 steps. There's death of the old self, there's going through the void, and there's rebirth into a state of higher consciousness, or heaven on earth, our promised land. We've already talked about the first 2 steps. The first is the necessary death of the old self, like the death of the caterpillar. For us, this can often be precipitated, Reverend Brummett says, by a tragedy, maybe a death or a divorce or COVID or substance abuse, or maybe a natural disaster like a hurricane. Maybe this death is brought on by our facing and letting go of something heretofore denied or ignored about ourselves, like the fact that we're negative or judgmental or prejudiced or vengeful or gossipy, whatever it is you've chosen to let go of and maybe haven't been able to yet. It might be that we start noticing and letting go of old, deep-seated self-doubts, like these bad things often happen to me, or the world is a scary place, or I am unworthy. This dying to our old self is often uncomfortable because it's new, but it's the start of something much better. It's like when an alcoholic no longer blames the bartender or his drinking buddies for his predicament. He takes responsibility for himself, and because of that is able to change. This is a death of the old self. In terms of today's caterpillar story, this is the stage when Caterpillar 2, Faith, let go of her familiar caterpillar self and became a larva and started thus to free herself from her constrictive 2-dimensional limited reality that she thought was the only reality up to that point, that of suffering and chaos. It's suffering and chaos when you're down there crawling around and you don't know what's going on or even which direction you're going in. And that's the way a lot of us live our lives, unfortunately. It was all caused by her lack of understanding, and that's what causes our suffering, is our lack of understanding. In unity and Buddhist terms, it's when we realize, finally, that our thinking creates our world, so we can change our thinking. Now, the second stage in our transition, you may remember, is what Robert Brummett called the void. This is like the larva stage for the caterpillar. It's often a period of insecurity, instability, or even darkness. We've let go of the old dysfunctional self, our caterpillar self, but we haven't yet flown away free as a butterfly in that 3-dimensional world. During the void or the larva state, it takes faith and courage. Many of us caterpillars would rather just hopelessly crawl forever across the incomprehensible oriental rug than face the insecurity of shedding our former self. It's tough. This is part of what being a spiritual warrior is all about. We see that spiritual warrior idea in the Hindu Bhagavad Gita, all over the Old Testament, and much of spiritual literature. It's during this void stage, this larva stage, that we are often so disoriented that we're tempted to just revert back to our old ways. Even if it causes us suffering, at least it's familiar. Reverend Brummett says that the void state is when people often resort to drugs, alcohol, and other forms of unhealthy escapism. We'd rather be miserable than face the terror of insecurity for a while. That's why the idea of the spiritual warrior is so written about. It takes courage to embrace the unknown. And I might add that during this void time, counseling is really a big help to reaching our promised land. And that is what I want to really emphasize today, that allegorical promised land in the Bible, that heaven on earth state of consciousness. It's the state in which we have become wiser, more mature, more peaceful, and more powerful. We are able to soar above these confusing patterns of the tapestry of life and recognize the beauty of those geometric designs, those delicate flowers and Arabian Nights on horses and the rug. In other words, we're able to see the divine order of it all. It was always there. We just didn't know it when we were down there crawling around in a two-dimensional reality. But three-dimension, we can see it. Now, at that point, we have become like the young Native American boy who, during the ceremonial initiation, the drums are going, and he's with his tribe. He leaves the tribe, goes out into the forest all alone, faces his dragons, and then returns home as a true warrior. This stage of life is an archetypal symbol of maturity and spiritual awakening. And this is when life starts to get much more interesting, authentic, peaceful, and fun. Teilhard de Chardin. How many of you have heard of Teilhard de Chardin? 2, 3, okay. I never know how to gauge these things. Well, Teilhard de Chardin was a famous priest and paleontologist, and in his seminal book, The Phenomenon of Man, he says that the universe is the physical manifestation of an ever-evolving consciousness, and that mankind as a species is ever evolving toward its awareness of its oneness with all life. And that is the evolution of consciousness. And it's the very thing, he says, that allows us to reintegrate back into our tribe as a new person. A Course in Miracles says the same thing, that life is all about our reintegration back into our true self, which is our at one with God and all life, all beings. And that is what being awake is. You know, after Buddha became enlightened under the Bodhi tree, it said that a man noticed his countenance and went up to him and said, "Are you a god?" And he looked at him and he said, "No, I am awake." This is the third and final stage of the transition. We have awakened, so we can see all these patterns and beauty, and we can make sense of the whole thing. We fly free from our two-dimensional world. As they keep pointing, this is a butterfly for those of you who can't see it. We saw through a glass darkly, and then we saw face to face all the possibilities that we couldn't see in life before. And my dear friends, this transition, this waking up process is not a one-time thing. We wake up daily, all day, if we're lucky, in small ways. We die daily, as St. Paul said, and then we'll be given bigger opportunities and challenges that help us wake in bigger ways. That is the meaning of, in Mark 4:25, "Unto him that hath, it shall be given." When we have succeeded with our small assignments, we're given the gift of larger ones. Excuse me, which lead to further growth toward the promised land, which is heaven on earth. Excuse me. And at that stage, there is no more suffering, only peace and joy. That's our heaven on earth. We start seeing everything differently. From up there, we're seeing this whole pattern in the rug. We develop compassion for ourselves and for others because we start to see with Christ's vision. We forgive ourselves and others because we understand that we and they know not what we do when we are in an unevolved state. This transition to a higher state that Reverend Brummett talks about is no mystery. It's not some woo-woo thing found in Buddhist, Hindu, or Taoist esoteric texts. The Western Bible presents it quite clearly as follows. First, wake up. Second, repent. Third, let yourself be born again. Jesus told us to wake up many times. Be here now. This is what meditation is all about. It helps us wake up and see what we are doing and feeling and thinking. Secondly, the whole Old Testament, which I'm reading in great detail right now. I've almost finished it. I promised you I would. I have. And the whole Old Testament is telling us to repent, which is a complete metanoia. In Greek, repent means to change. It doesn't mean to go to confession and feel better about doing the same old thing over and over again. Repent means to change our thinking, to change. It's the death of the old self, and the old self that did whatever it is that we're repenting. We let go of that old self that stole or killed or cheated or lied or was judgmental or gossipy or unforgiving. We change. Then thirdly, once we've truly died to our old self, we go through that void of change and we become a complete new person. We are reborn. Maybe we own up to our feelings of pride or prejudice or unforgiveness. Maybe we face the fact that the problem with the outer world is our thinking. That's a pretty advanced spiritual concept. So we change our thinking. Maybe the alcoholic quits blaming the bartender and the drinking buddies for her problems, type of thing. We quit resisting the truth. We enter into a stage of what the Eastern spiritual schools call non-resistance. I know you've probably all heard that a lot because it's seeped into Western thought too. Non-resistance. Now, this surrender does not mean giving up or being a doormat or resigning in despair. It is the art of flowing with what really is. It's called flowing with the Tao. Tao means the way. The way means God. So the Tao means God. For example, an expert sailor surrenders to the wind and uses it to his advantage. An expert canoeer surrenders to the river. They don't resist the wind and the water. They flow with what is. They flow with the Tao. Reverend Brummett says that resistance comes in the form of judgment, anger, fear, confusion, denial, and rationalization. That's resistance. He says that some kind of resistance is at the core of all compulsive and addictive behaviors. Wisdom helps us flow with and surrender to what is, and not resist it. We work with it. The sailor and the canoeer work with the water and the wind. They don't resist it. We work with the world. Clinging to an outmoded identity, our outmoded identity or view of life, is a form of resistance to what is. It's like hanging on to our caterpillar stage and refusing to transition into that butterfly. It takes courage and insight and perseverance to retrain ourselves to open up and embrace each new little rebirth all day long. And when we quit resisting life and start flowing with the Tao or God, we start to see everything in our lives differently. It's a cosmic dance. I haven't been used to talking for 2 weeks. Life becomes a cosmic dance that is evolving and unfolding and freeing us more and more. Excuse me. We then quit resisting life, and we allow life to teach us. Everything that happens can be our teacher. And thus is our journey. We wake up. We allow the death of our old self. We go through the void of insecurity and then embrace our new self. We start flowing with the Tao. We're ready to return to our tribe as a new being with new wisdom and new powers. Nothing has externally changed, but we have. So our whole world has changed, and that makes all the difference. Our world comes into focus finally as the patterns on the tapestry, when we're in a three-dimensional world, the world comes into focus. We can see what it is, and we realize that it is a peaceful, beautiful, and splendid place, like the oriental rug that the caterpillars, Wanda and Faith, crawled through. But now Faith recognizes that divine order, the promised land, heaven on earth. She finally sees it. She always knew in her heart there was divine order, but now she can actually see it. Or as the famous poet T.S. Eliot said, "We shall never cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we began, but know the place for the first time." Amen.